All right, this one is long overdue, as we were just talking about before I started recording. We have tried to get you on in the past, so I'm excited that we had some mutual friends and I was able to get you here today. Somebody that has been requested to be on the show multiple times and is literally the master of the glutes. So I'm excited to dive into this for a few reasons. Number one, just really respect who you are and what you do, and the level of value you provide inside your content. As an evidence-based practitioner. So I'm really just excited to have you on, just selfishly. But also because, like, when I first started training people and I started actually going through my internship, we worked with a lot of athletes, and glutes and hamstrings were just the posterior chain in general was the biggest focus. And it was constantly getting beaten in my head of how much we had to train the posterior chain and how much glute work we did. And I remember being an 18-year-old trainer getting into it thinking like, I just wanted to get big quads and biceps. And I was so confused as to why we were doing so much glutes and hamstrings. But I later found out there's so much benefit to that inside of posture and performance and strength and so on and so forth. So I'm really excited for you to be able to explain some of that, since you are literally the glute guy. But before we do get into the glutes, how'd you go from where you were as a teacher into where you are today? Like, kind of give us your story in a nutshell. I know you've told this story many times, but it's really interesting how you went from that career to being literally the most well-known glute trainer expert in the world, arguably. And I mean, you've had some pretty crazy transformations. So I'm excited to dive into your story.
It's funny. I hope I'm the most popular in the world. That's like a small subset of trainers, the glute experts. I feel like I started the niche, like I was kind of the first and only glute expert. I mean, there were like people who knew a lot about the glutes, but they weren't crazy about it like I was, like took it to a whole new level. And now there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And I like to think that I started off this niche. But anyway, the funniest thing about this person who really influenced my life, I tried to find her. Next time I'm visiting Phoenix, I need to go to Scottsdale Community College and like ask them, like, I need to find this person. But it was a professor during my master's degree. So I was a high school math teacher getting my master's degree, and I had a was in curriculum instruction, and my professor said to me, Brett, you need to go into this. Like you need to be in exercise science. I've been teaching for 13 years as a professor. I've never received a project like yours. You clearly went so above and beyond. This is your life's passion. You're probably a great math teacher, but life's too short to waste. You got to do what you love doing, and this is your calling. I can set you up with, like colleagues at SCC, at Scottsdale Community College, to try to become an exercise science professor, but you need to, make your way to fitness. And then at that point I was teaching, I had a lot of students, like male athlete students, that I thought would love to join me. So I thought, what if I open up my own gym? I bet it would, all the kids from the school would want to train with me. And it didn't turn out that way. It started off like all these women in my life, my family, my friends, they'd say, oh my God, I want to train with you. And I'd say, well, I kind of have a bunch of like powerlifting and like athletic training equipment, like I remember I saved up $15,000 on a teacher's salary, which is pretty good, especially in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And I used that to buy a bunch of equipment. So I had this badass garage gym, okay? It was like a giant power rack and platform with all the bells and whistles, a competition bench press, dumbbell set, a reverse hyper, a glute ham developer, a sumo base 45-degree hyper, a prowler, bunch of specialty bars, and that was about it, And all these women were like, "Oh, I love training like an athlete. I love training that way. Let's do it." So they, so just so happened that I got like my first, like 5 clients were women, and they told their friends, and then I had 10, and then then I finally opened up a gym. When I had 10 paying clients paying me $300 a month, I figured, well, that will cover the lease. So I opened up a gym in Scottsdale, having no money saved up. So I had to get clients rapidly. So I started up a gym in Scottsdale called Lifts. And it was in Gainey Ranch, a nice area. And within 3 months, I had like 55 clients. And I remember, I think I made 6 or 7 grand profit the third month. And I'm like, man, I'm on my way to 6 figures. I'm going to kill it. People were asking me, can we franchise this place? I'm like thinking I'm going to franchise it. And then the economy collapsed. That's the housing market crash of like 2007 and 8. And it was terrible. If you were a business owner in that time, times were tough. And I had to get crafty because all the gyms in my, all the shops in my plaza went under. And like I was one of the last two left. And then all of a sudden like everything fell through. So at that point, I'm like, what can I do to further my career? Like what can I be doing right now? So I thought, well, I'll turn to blogging and social media. And that's what I ended up doing. So no matter what your situation, you can always be working on your career, whether you're making money or not. You can be learning. You can be putting out content. You can be making connections. And that's what I did. The first few years of blogging, I wasn't concerned about making money. I just wanted to get my methods out there and start spreading my word and my message and build up popularity and meet colleagues, So I didn't care about the money at first. And I think that paid off because I blogged for like probably an average of 4 times a week for like 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
People don't see that now. They see the Instagram success. They don't realize how much I read, how much you know, all the stuff I did to lay the foundation. That graphic, it's like, here's what you see with success. Here's what you don't see. And it's like
The iceberg underneath.
an iceberg that there's like, 80-90% of the mass is underneath the water that you don't see.
Yeah. I think that's actually a very like common thing amongst successful coaches, trainers, and business owners in the industry is like there's a lot of behind the scenes work that people just completely forget about. And I can even relate to that because everything for me started as a blog. I was just a trainer and I was just blogging my journey. And that blog grew over 6 years before it became an online business. And now I have a team of coaches. But same thing as you, I just wanted to read, learn, and teach. I was like, let me learn and then let me express it in a blog, and because there wasn't social media back then. But I think it's so important for young trainers hearing to like actually be able to spend time doing that without seeing the bright lights, so to speak.
What was nice about being a teacher is I made such little money. I got used to living off nothing. And so I remember when I was making, like my 6-year teacher, I was making 36,000 a year. And it was like, that was more than I could spend back then. So I saved. And so I've kind of always been like that. Even now when I'm making a lot of money, I still am frugal. I still save a ton. And it makes you feel secure because it's like, look, if the shit goes down and Instagram changes their algorithms and the real estate market goes to crap and, something happens, well, what do I need to survive off of? 6 figures? I could make that in my sleep now,
Yeah, 100% agree. I love that, man. So as we kind of shift
And
gears into,
by the way, not to interrupt you, a lot of the influencers I see do the opposite. It's like they start making money and all of a sudden they're showing off their cars and they're just living in perpetual travel mode, which is fine for them because that's your prerogative, however the hell you want to spend your money. I just think it's we got to learn from the examples set by these athletes and stuff. It's like
yeah.
some of them going bankrupt and they made $50 million. And it's like, what you have is what you make minus what you spend.
Well, I think that's the difference between like somebody like yourself. I think people see the number of followers you have and maybe consider you an influencer. But when I see you, I think of like a coach and a interpreter of science, right? It's not really an influencer. You've just had an influence on people, so the following grew. And I think that's the biggest difference.
That's funny you say that because like I had someone ask me that once, are you an influencer? And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm an influencer. Like I meet what are the criteria,
Yeah.
I think I'm influential. So yeah, I'm an influencer, but it's just has a negative stigma to it,
Yeah, 100%. So as you started getting more and more into this, like why, the obvious question, why glutes? What made you shift from just training like people with an athletic approach and using, I'm sure back then some of the pieces of equipment that you mentioned weren't as popular in that realm. And I think a lot of trainers, I remember getting out of school and being like, I'm just going to train soccer players. Like that's all I'm going to do. And then I realized that college soccer players didn't have money and I just trained a bunch of moms and like, but I had a lot of the similar equipment.
That's every personal trainer. I'm going to train just athletes. And then you realize it's like the overweight and the older pop and the stay-at-home moms. They're the
Yep.
ones with the money and training them, you know?
So what shifted gears to get all about the glutes?
Well, you know, it stems from the fact that I had none growing up. And I don't think people can relate if they've had, like, I get so many emails. I mean, it's crazy. I went to the LA Fit Expo a couple weeks ago, and I had a booth there, and I had such a, long line of people visiting me, and they're like, "You're my hero," or like, "You changed my life," and I'm like, "Really? I'm your hero, not some like Barack Obama type person, but just like me?" And they're like, "Yeah." By the way, I don't care about politics, so I don't even know. Like, I'm not just being someone who's most people think is admirable. But anyway, um, like, these people are like, "You changed my life, and I can't thank you enough." But I can relate because I know what it felt like to have zero butt, like a negative butt. I had nothing there. My back went right into my legs, and so I remember being like 16 years old and being like, "I'm not okay with this. I don't like that I have no butt, and I want to fix it." And I mean, hell, that was 27 years ago. And I remember just trying to learn back then because we didn't have the internet, like I had to learn through magazines. And then the sad things about that is I had to read the bodybuilding magazines, and bodybuilders don't train glutes. They train legs. It's funny. They train traps. Like you think of every muscle, traps, delts, pecs, lats, biceps, triceps, you know, quads, hamstrings, calves, abs. But then there's like some muscles that you just don't really talk about, like the forearm muscles. They don't say I train forearms; those just get worked when you train like back and things and do dumbbell work and stuff. And glutes were like that. It was like, well, look, you don't have to train glutes; they get worked when you do your squats and your deadlifts. And for some people, but also back then, they actually didn't want big glutes. That was like, you didn't want overdeveloped glutes. Vince Gironda was one of the guys who was like, don't even do squats, do like hack squats so your glutes don't overpower your body. So you look at all the older bodybuilders and most of them didn't have, like Arnold didn't have huge glutes, but the women wanted glutes. They've made this whole glute thing popular, women wanted nicer butts. And so I kind of like had to learn through lots of ways, like, because bodybuilders didn't give me many ideas. So I had books and things like that, and Jane Fonda type stuff. And it was like I wanted to do the glute bridges and the floor exercise, the supine, the quadruped work. I wasn't afraid of that. Problem was, you had to do such high reps with that stuff. And back then we didn't think high reps built any muscle. Thought you had to go super, super heavy. Well, so every exercise I looked at, if it was like a body weight movement, I was like, well, how could I load this? And I think that's what helped me figure out the hip thrust. It was like 2006, I'm watching UFC fights and I'm like, man, we need an exercise to help strengthen like a mount escape, It's going to be like a glute bridge, but with weight. But it's not much range of motion. How can we increase the range? Well, let's put our shoulders up on a bench. And so when I invented the hip thrust, I made a machine for it called the Scorcher. That was in my first gym lifts. But that's what really led to me being like this glute specialist. It was like when I had lifts, all these people were like, he has this special machine. And they'd come in and that's the first thing they'd use. Like everyone start off on the Scorcher and then did everything else. And so they'd They loved it. And so that was like, I mean, I'd be in my gym and all of a sudden someone would run to the cubby, get out their phone, call a person, and that person would show up like 15 minutes later. It'd be like, you know, the mom or something calling the daughter, and the daughter would show up and be like, okay, I heard this is an awesome glute workout. Can I join too? And I remember one of my clients, Leslie, like 13 of my clients were from her. Like she referred 13 different clients. She was like a very, very popular person. So it just kind of happened that way. But one thing that my clients were always saying to me was, Bret, why don't you share your methods? Like, why don't you write? Why aren't you speaking for the news stations? You're the best out here in Arizona, but you don't get out there. And I'm like, how do these people have time to get out there? I'm so busy. You know, I'm exhausted. I train everyone. I train people for 7 hours. Then I wrote the programs for 1 to 2 hours, and then I lifted weights. By that time, I'm tired. I go home, make some food, barbecue, and I'm done, you know? So when the housing market collapsed and I said, I'll reinvent myself, well, that's when I had some time to write and work on putting my methods all together. And that really helped me. You know, I wrote an ebook and kind of tried to explain my methods. And then I just started up YouTube, a blog, Facebook, Twitter. And it's kind of funny. That's what we did for so long. It was like, for how many years was it? Like from 2009 until probably like 2016, for probably 7 years, like you did the same pattern. You filmed a YouTube video, you embedded that into your blog, you wrote the blog, you had a thumbnail, you posted it to, you know, you published it, you put the link on Facebook, you put the link on Twitter, you wrote a newsletter out, and you said, hey, click see my new article. And then that was it. It was the same daily process over and over. And now I don't do any of that. I kind of quit Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and I quit blogging. And I think I was the first guy to stop blogging just because I was pissed at Facebook. You know, I'm like, man, it used to be fun. I'd get, you know, like 2,000 likes and 500 shares on an awesome article. And now I'm getting 330 likes and 30 shares.
Unless you pay.
It's not, yeah, unless you pay. And I was too proud to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm a scientist. I'm not paying. So I just was like, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to support Facebook anymore because I worked so hard building up my crowd. They never told me they're going to change the algorithms. And, you know, I felt betrayed a little bit. And it annoyed me too because I had power. I had power as a scientist, and now it's like you cut off my limbs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I could write an article refuting something, and if you don't have any algorithms, it will spread. The stuff I write will be shared by people, and now it's not.
Yeah.
So at that time, my brother was telling me, you know, about Instagram, and I'm like, nah. It looks to me kind of like a Snapchat type thing where you just post pictures and you can't link. And I just, no, I'm a businessman. I don't, why would I join Instagram? And he's like, just trust me, Bret, it's the wave of the future. And I'm like, how is it the wave of the future? He's like, just trust me, just get on Instagram. And I'm like, but you can't link. He's like, I don't care, just do what I say. And thank God I did, because I just started, you know, you can look, you can go all the way back and look at the evolution of my Instagram. It's gotten so much better. It used to just be posting like memes and my food and my workouts. And then it's just evolved to where now I try and take it very seriously and post educational stuff. And it's cool because I've heard marketers that are like, just because you have a big following doesn't make good money, which is true, but they'll say Instagram followers doesn't equal, like, has nothing to do with your income. And I'm like, how would they know?
Yeah.
How would they know? They don't have big following. Like my income has been directly related to my Instagram
Yeah.
side. Like exactly proportional, you know?
Yeah.
And I can put some out to my newsletter, and I have like 130,000 followers on my newsletter, I think, subscribers. And say I launch something, I'll make X amount of money. Then I put that out on my Instagram and my story, and it brings in 6 times that amount,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's been my Instagram's been great for my career.
Yeah.
It's also been great for the popularity of the hip thrust because, see, back when Facebook was it was like Facebook and Twitter, you had all these coaches that hated the hip thrust, and they were like, "That's stupid, just squat." Well, then on Instagram, the women got so much more popular.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember first joining Instagram and you're like, how does this person have like 200,000 followers already? It's intimidating,
Yeah.
Cool, I've got 200. How am I ever going to get to 200,000,
Mm-hmm.
And they would post, they would basically post like a hip thrust, and like a man would come on and be like, that exercise doesn't work. Just don't do it. And then the woman would reply and write, actually, it does work. I feel it more than any other glute exercise. Thank you. And then it would get all these likes, her comment, and everyone would shut down that guy. And the guys just realized we can't, the girls were like, we're not going to let the guys lie here, And so, little by little, every one of the women on Instagram were doing hip thrusts, and it went from something like big in some circles to something global.
It's funny, man. I think it's actually been cool because I remember actually when you first got on Instagram, because I remember reading a hip thrust article on T Nation, I believe it was T Nation, like years ago by you. And at the gym I was interning at, we had a hip thrust machine. And it was the first time I was introduced to it. And then I started reading your articles and stuff. And I watched you grow and do your thing on Instagram. And to see that evolution has just been insane. But so cool. And it's funny because I want to ask you about hip thrust versus squat. So it's funny that you bring up those comments, those suggestions. And and I haven't dug into that study at all. So I actually don't even know. I know basically I saw Menno post something and I saw like what he said, like squats are better, but I didn't read any of it. So I don't have a ton of information on it, but I think it's funny because like you said, all these people are saying, oh, squats are better. But why is it that you have so much evidence behind all these people making insane transformations from adding the hip thrust? It's like they were squatting, but now they're squatting and hip thrusting, or now they're just predominantly hip thrusting. And I'd also, like, in my experience, when I get a woman that wants to build her glutes, I can do more hip thrusting throughout the week than I can squatting, just from like a systemic fatigue standpoint, and just making sure they're not just getting smashed every week from a recovery standpoint. But I just want to hear your thoughts on like the squat versus hip thrust and like that study and everything like that, if you can.
Okay, so what's cool is that, like, by the time this podcast is posted, because we are recording this on, what day is today? February 11th, okay? So let's say this comes out in 2 weeks, and it's Tuesday, what would it be? The 25th, okay? Say this podcast comes out on the 25th. This was recorded on the 11th. I anticipate some stuff going down in between this time, okay? So basically the authors have some serious explaining to do. Now, I wrote a response in my buddy Alan Aragon's research review, and Cody, if you email me, I can send you that. It's a good response, and I plan on putting on my blog a couple days later, but there's more to the story, and there's all this weird stuff about their data. Okay, so they've got some serious explaining to do, but basically it's not just, here's what's crazy. The lead author's name is Barbalo, Mateus Barbalo, right? And I've never done this in my whole life. Like I'm not like this. I mean, even like as a peer reviewer, I have my PhD, but I like evidence. I like if it's like a study that had used good methods, I want it to be published, even if I don't agree with their conclusions or something. Like I'll tell them, like, be more cautious with your conclusions. But if they carried out a study, I'm not like this hardcore peer reviewer. I'm not this hardcore critic of research. But I read one of their past studies on volume. It was one of their first volume papers, and I have never done this right away. And I'm not like some overly suspicious person. But I looked at the chart and I printed it out and I looked at the chart for about 15 minutes and I'm like looking at it and I'm analyzing and I'm analyzing. And all of a sudden I go, this is fake. This is not real. No study that I've published. No, I've been involved with like 50 studies, right? Like nothing I've ever done works out like this. It's never this neat and this clean and this perfect.
Mm.
So I called up my friends and I'm like, this study's fake. Look at it. It never ends up like this. But how do you show that statistic? Like, how do you? So anyway, I'm like, we have to be able to show this. Now this is like a year ago, right? And then the next study they released was even prettier. And I'm like, I had this running joke with my friends that the Barbalo research, and I'm like, oh yeah, Barbalo research as if it's real, okay? And then, so what do you think when I see this study being published by Barbalo and Paulo Gentile? Now, Paulo Gentile is like a Brazilian, he reminds me of Charles Poliquin, but with Brazil. He likes to make these bold claims, but he also just bashes the hip thrust constantly. And he's always making like videos that mock the hip thrust. And it'll be like James Harrison does a set of hip thrusts, and then there's this like Spider-Man being pushed in a shopping cart down the aisle, and he's just staring at you doing a humping motion. And then it'll show someone else doing a set, and then it switches back to it, and then there's some funny music playing. And at the end of it, there's always this dog with like bulged out eyes that's like looking all shocked, and then that's like their humor, okay? So why is a professor doing stuff like that? And he's bashing the hip thrust. He's saying it does nothing. It does nothing. And here's what's so funny is what you mentioned. So this is my problem with scientists. You'll talk to scientists. Well, where's your evidence? Okay, what you just mentioned. How do you have all these before and after pictures? All this evidence. At what point does the evidence become like this is actually the best form of evidence? Let's talk to the hundreds of thousands of women that are doing hip thrusts and say, what'd you get better results from, when you squatted or when you started hip thrusting? Like 90% of them will say, when I started hip thrusting, my glutes blew up. Mm-hmm. And look at these glutes. Look at this before and after. And since this study got published, I'm having all these women. And the women, what I realized was the average woman knows more than the top male expert on glutes. I mean, think about it. Why would the men know anything about glute training? They typically just do like squats and deadlifts, maybe some lunges for their quads. They're not obsessed with glute training. They're not. In one study showed that women do 41 sets of glutes on average per week, whereas men do 12 on average. And the women know glute training so much more. So these women were like scrutinizing the study and they're like, something's wrong here. Like, why were the women squatting 205 but only hip thrusting 220? Like, what? That doesn't look right. And if so, they were untrained in the hip thrust. Why did they only gain 40 pounds on the hip thrust and they gained 75 pounds on the squat? Like, these women went in 12 weeks training just one day a week with 6 sets on a shitty, weird periodization protocol and gained 75 pounds on their squats, went from like 205 to 280 in 12 weeks. So they went from like novice powerlifters to like elite powerlifters in 12 weeks, training the squat 1 day a week and just doing 6 sets. No accessory work, no assistance lifts, like no power, like all the powerlifters with coaches, like actual powerlifting coaches, would say you never take a woman from an average of 205 to 280 in 12 weeks with that protocol. You don't even do that with the best protocol.
Yeah.
It's not 12 weeks. Even if you train twice a week with like a great protocol. So then I was looking at their other papers and I found one where, all right, so Cody, what could you bench press for 10 reps right now?
Probably 225, 215. Somewhere in there.
Okay, so say 225 for 10, okay? And what do you weigh?
170.
170, okay. So let's say you weigh 180 just to make it easy, okay? So these guys were benching 1.2 times their body weight, all right, for 10 reps. Mm-hmm. And then in 12 weeks, from doing 5 pressing sets a week. So picture this, you only train pressing 1 day a week. And then the remaining 6 days, no pressing exercises. And you do 5 sets. You do 2 sets of bench press, 2 sets of incline press, and 1 set of military press for 12 weeks. Do you think you'd get weaker or maintain or get stronger?
At best, maintain.
Right,
If
at
I'm
best
lucky.
maintain, right? Not these guys. These guys went from benching 1.2 times body weight to 1.5 times body weight off that protocol. So they basically, they weighed an average of like 180, and they put like 50 pounds or something. Anyway, it was like 60 pounds on their bench or something crazy like that. So they put a third of their body weight on their bench. So you weighed 170. We said, let's say you weigh 180. So that's like you basically putting 60 pounds on your 10 rep max. So if it's 225, now you're benching 285 for 10. Do you think you'll ever bench 285 for 10 in your entire lifetime?
I hate to say it, but no.
No. Like in my case, I weigh 240, 245, 240. The most I've ever bench pressed for 10 reps is 275. Okay, so a third of my body weight is 80 pounds. 275 plus 80 is 355. I've done 355 one time for a single, which I can't do it right now. I could probably get 340 or 345. But anyway, there's no way in hell I could do that 10 reps my entire lifetime.
and
Never.
I'm and I'm sure you're hitting. I know I am. I'm pressing twice a week on a periodized plan.
Twice a week, right, in a good. And you look at their protocol, and 3 of the 12 weeks is sets of 12 to 15 reps with 30 to 60 seconds rest in between sets. Like 6 sets with okay, so I had my niece do that protocol with squats. She can squat 195 pounds, okay? So first set she used, it's got to be a 2 up, 2 down tempo, nonstop to actual failure, meaning like you have to, in their definition, you have to fail. You actually have to fail, okay? So when she does squats, I have to curl the bar up, put it back on the rack, and then change the weights out in 30 to 60 seconds. So she did her first set with 115 and did like 14 reps, okay? Failed. I got to re-rack it, change the weights. I dropped down to 95 pounds. She got like 10. Okay. Then I moved it down to 65 pounds. She got like 12. Then she's just like dead. She's at this point, she's absolutely dead. So I dropped it down to 45 pounds. Her last 3 sets, she got 12, 10, 8. So her last set was 45 pounds for 8 reps. This is like, I mean, if you understand strength training, this is like an endurance protocol.
Yeah.
It's not a strength building protocol. So with this crummy protocol they put these women powerlifters went to elite status, and the men went to masters in powerlifting from a crummy, weird protocol. It would never happen. If you took girls who are used to training their glutes, with all this volume, and went to giving them just 6 sets a week of squats, their glutes would shrink because they're training their glutes 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
But not in this study. In this study, the squat like led to crazy glute gains, like 9% bigger glutes, and the hip thrust only 3%, and there were quad gains. But also, so I plotted out all the different studies, and I showed that there's like 7 studies. Okay, Barbalo's group had the lowest absolute hip thrust strength gains out of all 7 studies. So far and above the highest squat gains out of all the 7 studies, the lowest transfer from hip thrust to squats. It was just, I mean, it's just silly. It's just, and everyone who actually trains people, like all the lifters out there and all the trainers will just look at this and go, there's no way. There's no way. But then we start looking at, first of all, like the protocol itself. They had one supervisor for every 5 lifters. Well, they're going to failure. You have to re-rack you have to spot first of all, how are you going to make sure they use proper depth and lockout and proper form? It has to be 1-to-1. You know, you have to be there to say, make sure they're going deep enough, make sure their form doesn't hurt. And then when they fail, especially some of their studies use leg press. You have to fail in the leg press. That means you can't get it up. It comes back down. You've got to like push the whole weight stack back up. So according to what they described in the methods, there's no way that they could have even done the methods as they proposed. And so they need to explain all of this, but there's going to be a lot more because more people are looking at their research and just going, this does not add up. So basically, like, we can talk about the study as if it ever even took place, but it's likely, I mean, unless the authors can explain this, but they need to explain, how'd you get these, how does it not match up? How did you get these? But they need to explain every study they've done. Because the other thing is that this lab is too prolific to be taken seriously. This Barbalos published 11 studies in two years, 11 training studies in 2 years. No one can get that done. It's like, what lab are you using?
Yeah.
Where are you publishing this? There's no transparency. It's like, where's this secret place you're training these people at? And who are all these coaches? And what is going on? You need to explain all this stuff. And my guess is that I don't even know what's going to happen. You know, I'll challenge them to debate. I guarantee you they'll never debate me because I'd make fools out of them. I mean, I would love to debate Gentile. I'd love to debate Barbalo. But they've got some serious explaining to do about not just this study, but all of their studies now. And what I hope is that all the people who share this study, it's like, if you care about your followers, you put out false information, you need to correct it. You need to tell all those people, wow, you know, and hopefully these papers get retracted. But it's like, it did a lot of damage for the hip thrust. It's like all these people were like, LOL, I knew it didn't work. And all the people who do it are like, there's no way. You know, the people who, all my colleagues who, like you said, are obsessed with glute training, they're like, there's no way. So anyway, there's problems with the protocol, there's problem with the methods, there's problems with the data, there's problem with the stats. And you can look at these, the data, and just like, if you know about studies, you can look about how it's presented with everything being so nice and neat, and you can just go, no, that's not the way sports science research works. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things I appreciate about researchers like you, is that you are a coach and you've been a coach for so long that you have that side of evidence too, the experience, the anecdotal evidence of like thousands and thousands of people that you've actually worked with or talked to or have used your programs. And I think that not enough people put merit into that, especially with the evidence-based community growing and growing. I think people are grabbing onto that and thinking that if it hasn't been done by a research study, then it's inconclusive. It doesn't count. But there's so much value inside of experience of coaching.
Oh, it's so true. And that's my biggest asset. You know, as a PhD researcher, my greatest strength is like, if I peer review or if I'm involved in studies, it's like, I know what's impressive. I know what's reasonable. I know what's like, I could look at this study and go, that is absolutely impossible. That would never happen. And like this Barbalo guy, like, who is he? Are you certified? Are you an awesome lifter yourself? Are you like a world-renowned powerlifter? Are you certified? Like, how are you getting these results? Who are your coaches? Like, who are the like, we need to know. You, like, Louis Simmons would probably laugh at these results.
Yeah.
You know, he'd be like, what? That can't happen. And you know, the only way that could happen if they were taking steroids or something, but then you'd have to explain, well, why did this group see such great strength gains? Like, you'll never see someone gain more strength on squats than the other group does on hip thrusts. Like, the hip thrust group gains more strength always. And in this study, the hip thrust group gained 40 pounds, the squat group gained 75 pounds of strength. It doesn't add up. I don't know. I mean, they've got some explaining to do. Here's what I can think of. Like, if you wanted to, like, say, Cody, that you just crossed over to the dark side, and you're like, I don't even care at this point. Like, I want people to believe a certain thing, and I'm willing to take whatever means necessary. If that means fabricating data, well, you could either make up the data, never even conduct the study, and make it all up, okay? But in this scenario, you really need, in order to fool the coaches and also fool the peer reviewers into getting it published, then you need to know a little bit about strength training. You need to know what's realistic. Another one of their papers showed that they have people, their max bench press is stronger than their max leg press. Like, how could that ever be? How could any group of men ever leg press more than bench press more than they can leg press? Like, there's no way in hell ever.
No.
So they, like, I feel like they don't even know enough, like, about strength training to fudge the data, like to try to lie about it and make it realistic. And you have to know a lot about stats to, like, make sure that here's another huge problem. Their standard deviations are so low, which make their effect sizes high. It's like, in one study, I think they have like 2 kilogram standard deviations for bench press. So a group of dudes only varied in bench press strength by 4 pounds. Like, if you have a group of 10 people, you're going to vary probably 50 pounds in bench press strength.
Easily.
It's like,
Easily.
at least 20 kgs or more. I mean, when you take everything, but my colleagues are way smarter than me about, like, stats and stuff like that. Like I said, my strength is I spent my life in a gym with clients, their strength is they know so I'm hoping that other researchers come forward and call them out. And then we need to hold them accountable. It's like if it's found out to be that they lied about the research or fabricated it. By the way, I said 3 scenarios. The first scenario is you just make it up. You never even conduct the study. The second scenario, you conduct the study and then you just fudge the data. It didn't come out the way you want. You just take a red pen and write over it. The third is that you purposely, like, you try to get the results you want by being like, okay, guys, here's how you do a hip thrust. Instead of using like a 14-inch bench, we're going to use a 20-inch tall bench. You hinge from your neck, put your neck against the bench, arch your back as hard as you can, get into massive spine extension, and just move through this tiny hip range of motion or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we don't know. There was no pictures and there's no transparency with this group. Any one of my colleagues, if you were like, hey, we want to know, we have questions, we want answers, they'd answer them. They'd send back, okay, here's my lab, here's a picture of it, here's a video clip I took of my subjects. Here, you have confidentiality with subjects, but they post stuff all the time. Like, here's my subject posting something to Instagram. Like, here's the way we did it. Here's how we tested it.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to know? With this group, we'll see. I'm curious to see how they respond to all this and if they come clean, or if they try to cover it up, or if they divulge what happened. Or, I mean, they've got a lot of explaining to do, basically. But I can say with like 100% confidence that their studies are not legit, and the whole group needs to be, like, questioned, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I'm hoping Brazilians will get to the bottom of it. I'm hoping the Brazilians will, like, flood the university, flood these guys' inboxes, and DM and message them and say, we're not letting you get away with this. You don't get to lie. You don't get to make up data. You need to explain this. And if the answers aren't sufficient, then hopefully they, get banned or, like, fired from the university, and they never get taken seriously as researchers again, because it's not okay to fabricate stuff. That's
Right.
just does such a bad disservice to research in general. Because, Cody, I can't tell you how many people I talk to, and they're like, they already don't believe research, and it frustrates me because I always want people to care about research, and they're like, oh, well, research doesn't mean anything. You can say whatever you want, or you can get the data to say whatever it wants, or you can just lie about anything. You can say anything. And it's like, most researchers are good, and I'm not saying all research is good, but, like, it hones in on the truth over time. So I'm looking to fund a duplicate study, but They used ultrasound. I don't trust ultrasound for glutes that much. I know, like I used it myself for a long time. I mean, I spent 13 grand on ultrasound unit, used it on a one twin case study for my PhD and never used it again. I still have it. It's, you have to press down at the exact trajectory, the exact pressure, and you've got to gain experience with it. Well, I practiced a lot. There was one subject I couldn't see the fascia border. Like with like hamstring, you see a bone, but glutes, you don't see a bone. It's fascia, and it's on some people it comes up real easily. On other people, it doesn't. So I'd like to see MRI. The problem is MRI is really expensive.
Mm.
Anyway, we've rambled about this study long enough, but that's my take on it. I don't put any stock into it, and do both of them. Obviously, anyone with a brain would say do both.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love to hear for the people that don't understand mechanics and things like that. I'd love to hear like why you actually favor the hip thrust when it comes to volume. Because I think for some people, I mean, to me, it's very obvious. Like with a squat, your levers play such a big role that it can be glute dominant for some. It could be very quad dominant for others. It kind of depends on how you squat. But a hip thrust is almost always, no matter what, it's a glute exercise. You know what I mean? So what about the tension and the extension, things like that, that
Well,
actually make you favor it?
I should say that I love I love exercises in general. That's what I can't understand about this Paulo Gentile. He's always bashing hip thrusts. He's always bashing, isolation movements and single joint exercise. And it's like, I just love all exercises, And so I look at everything like it's a tool. The squat is probably the single most badass exercise there is, you know? Tell me one other exercise where you're so scared to do it, like to 1 rep max.
Yeah, no
If it's
shit.
a deadlift, if it's a deadlift, you're like, I can't get this. I get it, it doesn't leave the ground, or I
Yeah.
get it a foot off the ground and then I put it back down. Same with a hip thrust. If I don't lock it out, I just rest it down. But the squat, you might be stapled. You might not be coming back up. Kind of worry if you're going to die, So there's that fear there. So, but the squat is so functional. It works so many muscles. It's great for quads. It's good for glutes. It's great for adductors. But here's the thing. The hip thrust leads to greater glute activation because unlike other muscles, where you get peak glute activation is end range hip extension. Like most muscles, it's in a stretch position. With the glutes, it's the shortest it can be. So the hip thrust activates more glute muscle. It creates more tension. That's a very complicated way, though. To either the way we figure out tension on the muscle is very, very complicated. But based on modeling data, it looks like the hip thrust creates more tension than the squat. It's way easier to learn. There's not that learning curve. The hip thrust, it's like favors most body types in anthropometry, whereas squats really, there's some people who just are not good squatters. Maybe they have a really long, relatively long femurs or poor ankle mobility or something, but it just, probably like 1 in 4 people are not good squatters. So with the hip thrust, there's 3 points of three bases of support, 3 points of support. With a squat, there's 2. It's more stable. It doesn't require as much coordination. It's easier to learn, and you can do it way more frequently because it doesn't have as big of an eccentric phase. You lower it much more rapidly, and you don't stretch the muscle to quite as long of muscle lengths. But it does, I do feel like they move the glutes through a similar range of motion. They move the hips through a similar range of motion, and here's why. People will point out, well, in the squat, you get more range of motion than the hip thrust, and that's true. But we're looking at angular range of motion around the hips, okay? And if you're anteriorly tilted at the bottom of a hip thrust and posteriorly tilted at the top, see, the average person has 20 degrees of hip hyperextension mobility. But when you posterior pelvic tilt, that's the same thing as hip hyperextension. So when you run out of range of motion, that's an extra 20 that you won't come into. And in a squat, you probably don't even finish in neutral. You're probably still anterior tilted a little bit. That last 20 degrees of a squat is not loaded in tension, though. Mm-hmm. It's like you already completed the lift. So squat might be active from say you have really good hip mobility, maybe 135 to 20 degrees or something. But the hip thrust might be loaded from, 100 degrees to 120 degrees or something like that. But some people, 100 degrees to negative 20 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. Some people have really, really good hip extension mobility, hip hyperextension mobility. In one study, it shows 40 degrees, but in here at Glute Lab, I tested someone who looked like they had 70 degrees. Like they could just keep going, their leg could just keep going back. Those people are going to get more range of motion from the hip thrust because they have they can get the glutes way shorter as they come up. They're not reaching that zone with the squats. So anyway, but it doesn't create the muscle damage. So you can do it more frequently. So it's like, I wish I could say the authors like Barbal and Gentile. How much do you believe this? Okay, I'll bet you 100 grand or 200 grand or $1 million. I'll bet you guys $1 million. We'll do it in a ward. We track what they get fed. They get similar macros. They get similar calories, the same amount of protein. They're going to live in this ward, and you can train them as however you want, but you can only use a squat. And I can train them however I want, and I can only use the hip thrust. And let's see which group gets the better glute gains. Because what would your optimal protocol be for squats? If you wanted glute growth, what would it be for skin? You could only squat. What would you do? Like, would you squat 3 days a week?
Definitely not one.
Well, not one, but you also wouldn't squat 6 days a week, I don't think.
Yeah, no, and that's even a hard question to answer because like if anybody ever wants better glutes, I'm never just squatting. It's just
right. But that's what doctors recommend basically.
yeah.
Just squat, and no one does it that way. And that's what's funny is I wish I could go to these guys and go, like, it doesn't bother you that, like, same with their volume papers. Their volume papers all say that 5 to 10 sets is better than 15 to 20 sets per week per muscle group. It doesn't bother you that no one actually trains this way. So you think everyone is doing it wrong?
Yeah.
5 sets. Like if you wanted to grow your glutes, you get the best results doing 5 sets a week, not 20 sets. My girls all do like 30 to 40 sets a week,
Yeah.
And don't do any abduction work. Don't do any single joint work, just compounds, just vertical squats, deadlifts, leg press, lunges. I like my rule of thirds, which is like a 30 exercise should be horizontal, like hip thrusts and back extensions and glute bridges and pull throughs and stuff like that, reverse hypers. And then a third should be vertical, like squats and lunges and deadlifts and stuff like that. And then a third should be lateral rotary, like abduction movements, external rotation movements. And that tends to develop all the fibers and it doesn't beat you up so much because the vertical exercises beat you up not only systemically, but they also make the glutes the source, create the most muscle damage. The same is not as true for horizontal and especially lateral exercises. So the lateral, it's like free volume. It's like penalty free volume, you're not beat up from it. So anyway, I think if you were creating the optimal, like say you wanted the most glute growth you could get out of just squatting, you'd probably squat 3 days a week and you'd probably do like 5 sets, 3 days a week, 5 sets of like 6 to 12 reps, maybe you do like a daily undulating situation where you different rep ranges each day. Okay. But if you wanted your glutes to grow the most from hip thrusts, I would hip thrust 6 days a week. I do Monday, Wednesday, Friday heavier with a barbell. I do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, like knee banded, single leg, pause rep, high super high reps. Because you're not creating much damage. You don't have repair to do. So you can just fast forward the process. And if all you did was hip thrust, you didn't do anything else, you could probably hip thrust 6 days a week and not get so beat up, especially if you alternated like 3 heavy days with 3 lighter days. And I think you'd get so much more glute growth from that protocol. It would just be a landslide. But again, if you want to be a good scientist, you need to point out, like, Bret's biased. He's the inventor of the hip thrust. Of course, he's going to think this. I am biased, so we need a study to show this. So I'm setting forth my prediction But I also think if all these studies had combined group, a combined group that did squats and hip thrusts, they'd see the best
Yeah,
results.
I
You
agree.
know?
I think that it blows my mind because I think if you are an experienced trainer, it's almost common sense. Like you said earlier, like have you guys trained people? Because
Right.
and if somebody came to me and they're like, hey, I really want to hypertrophy my shoulders and arms, and I say, hey, we're only going to do bent rows in military press. I don't want you doing any lateral raises or curls at all. It's like, why? That's the point
Why?
of isolation.
Well, that's what this Barbalo and Gentile, like they have, you look at their research and it's just so, that's another problem. Not only they're prolific, but they're also always like Brad Schoenfeld and my buddy, we always joke that we're always like, 50% of the time or more, we're wrong about our predictions. And we're always like trying to explain the data, like, okay, our mind muscle connection study, we're like, why did this work for the biceps, but not the quads? Any ideas? How do we explain this? Because you've got to try to, in the discussion for a study, you got to write it up. You got to come up with an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
In their studies, they've got 4 papers on volume, all showing that low volume trumps high volume. Okay, like really low volume is better than higher volume. Okay, they've got 4 or 5 papers on single joint exercises, all showing that basically, like, all but one of them. But I mean, basically, you don't get any more gains adding in single joint movements. And like, who trains that way? So it's like, is anyone really going to be like, yeah, I want to grow my delts. I'm just doing military press. What about your rear delts? I
Yeah.
guess they grow from rows, but it's not the same. What about calves? It's like they just want, and they didn't measure calves because calves wouldn't have gotten the same growth. They'll measure biceps, triceps, quads, and hammies, and whatever they do. One group does just compound, the other group adds in single joint, and there's no extra growth on the part of the single joint groups. And it's like, but if I had a gun to their head and said, I'm gonna, or like I say someone kidnapped their family or offered them $1 million or something and said, you got to put an inch on your arms in the next 2 weeks or else, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Or you get this money or we're going to, whatever, kill your family or something. Obviously, they do arm work, right? Like you'd be doing chin ups and dips and close grip bench, but you'd also be doing curls and tricep extensions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we all do. So
Yeah.
they're so hell bent on trying to go against the grain, trying to tell people you don't need to do volume, just do low volume. You don't need to ever do single joint exercises. You don't ever need to do. They have a few papers on like advanced methods. You don't need to do advanced methods like drop sets and things like that. Just do like force negatives, things like that. Just do traditional sets. It always comes out. It's all fits their narrative and says the same thing. You don't need to do hip thrust, just squat. And no one actually trains that way. And the people who do this for a living know that you see the best results when you have more variety.
Yeah. Like why limit yourself just to the compounds? I think it's more obvious to people who have experience. So I'm glad that you went about it that way. One of the questions, you kind of answered this in that explanation, but one of the questions I had in here is just like kind of creating the optimal program for building your glutes. And you've kind of explained it, like a higher frequency using a horizontal, vertical, and lateral approach. Is that what you would recommend people to do?
Yeah, I have this rule of thirds. I really like it, but but then people take it too far. This is just a blueprint. It's meant to be tinkered with. Because on the one hand, I like to switch focuses every month, every 4 weeks, like, and focus on different lifts, which I've never seen anyone do in the periodization literature. It's always just assumed you focus on like the big 3. So that's an aspect to my system. And I do this with my Booty Buy Bret members. It's like every 4 weeks we have a new program and I switch the focus around in a very strategic manner.
Mm-hmm.
But this way you put some lifts on maintenance mode, other lifts you're trying to build. Like Cody, how old are you?
I'm 27.
27. It's probably at this point pretty hard. Like what's the most chin up reps you've gotten?
Oh, fuck. I don't even know if I've done a set unbroken in a long time. 20 maybe.
Yeah. So
I don't
say you
even.
want to beat that.
Okay.
You're going to need to specialize on chin-ups for a while.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd be like, I'm going to spend this month really hammering out chin-ups. Chin-ups are one exercise that becomes really hard to beat over time, you know?
Yeah.
Um, you know, and if I was like, you know, what's the most you've ever deadlifted? Like, okay, Cody, I want you to beat that this month. You'd have to really focus on it, and you can't. So that's the one thing about powerlifting I always realized. Like the deadlift complicates everything. If you could just squat and bench, it would be easy to build it both. But then the deadlift, and you're like, God, if I deadlift too hard, my low back is sore. Now I can't squat as much. It's hard to build 3 lifts at once,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But with bodybuilding, there's 6 good lifts or 10 good lifts you want to build. You know, you got the bench, squat, and deadlift, but you also want to build your military press, your chin up, your hip thrust. You know, you want to be doing rows. You want to be doing some single joint movements. So it's hard to really build your strength. So I try to focus on like one upper body and one lower body lift at a time. I try to fluctuate my training stress by going week 1, go at a 7, week 2 at an 8, week 3 at a 9, and week 4 at a 10. So it's like you kind of get some deloading in there. You're not always crushing yourself every week. I try to use the rule of thirds, meaning 30-year exercise, but there's 3 components to the rule of thirds. The first component is what I mentioned earlier. A 30-year exercise should be horizontal, a third vertical, and a third lateral and rotary. Okay. Then also a 30 rep should be taken to failure, a third 1 to 2 reps shy of failure, and a third nowhere close to failure, maybe 5 to 10 reps shy. Like your band work.
Mm-hmm.
Your band work, you're not really going to failure. Like I could be like, all right, Cody, do this till you can't do it anymore. And you're like, I'm burning so bad, I got to stop. And at that point, I could, you know, it's okay. It's like when you're running. Pretend you're running and you're like, you ran like 6 miles and you're like, I'm going to collapse. I'm going to collapse. I can't run anymore. And all of a sudden it's like, Cody, there's a tiger behind you. Look out. You could bust out an all out sprint for like
Yeah.
10 seconds. You
Yeah.
weren't really, it's called the central governor theory. Your brain is exhausted. It's telling you these things, but you have some juice left. That's kind of how it is with higher reps. You do lateral band walks and you're like, I'm done, but you really could probably get 10 more if you had to.
Yeah.
So you're really training shy of failure, even though it burns like crazy. Okay. Now, but also the band work doesn't create as much muscle damage. So it's like the rule of thirds with the exercise vectors. Okay, if you did 36 sets a week of vertical hip extension exercise, you get beat up too much.
Mm-hmm.
There's all squats, lunges, and deadlifts, you know? But the hip thrusts and glute bridges and back extensions don't take it out of you much. And the band work and the lateral, you know, the lateral exercise don't beat you up that much. Now, also what I mentioned about, you know, effort, some to failure, some not to failure, some not even close. And then also I like different loads. Make sure you're doing some heavy work. A 30 reps or sets should be heavy. A third of your sets should be moderate and a third high rep. So generally the things you're focusing on, you can go lower reps because you're trying to build strength. Then the other lifts moderate. And then at the end, you throw in some lateral work and it's for high reps. This tends to be, so say you do 36 sets a week, you know, 12 of the sets are horizontal, 12 are vertical, 12 are lateral rotary, 12 sets are heavy, 12 sets are moderate, 12 sets are light, 12 sets are to failure, 12 sets are not to failure, and 12 sets are nowhere close to failure. That makes it manageable. You can do 36 sets a week that way
Mm-hmm.
and still see results. But if you did 36 sets of vertical exercise all to utter failure, it'd be too much.
Yeah.
That's why I like it on the high end of things, but with some caveats. But it's definitely not 5 sets according to these guys, these researchers.
I think that one's obvious. Man, that's perfect. I think that's actually super applicable for people to take away and use for their programming. So I appreciate that you broke that down.
Well, the other thing you mentioned, training frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, here's where I feel like we talk a lot about biomechanics, we talk a lot about physiology, but we don't talk enough about psychology. Cody, how many days a week do you like to train?
Every day, really, but like not balls of the wall. But yeah, I just like doing something.
Same here. So if I'm like, Cody, I'm your coach, damn it. You're doing 2 full body workouts a week. Will you feel, I mean, even if you're like seeing decent results, will you feel
No,
like you're doing your all?
no,
You
not at
have
all.
to blend this psychology together. Some people like to lift every day. With those people, I say, are you cool with 6 days a week? You really need one day off where you just
Yeah.
sit around and do nothing and watch TV and eat and rest and sleep. But if you want 6 days a week, I'll give you the compound bro system that I made up. I put that in my book, Glute Lab. It's like the 3 days are full body where you train heavy compound movements. And then the alternating 3 days, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, heavy compound. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I call them bro days. It's like, Cody, you could go to the gym and just pump up your muscles. Pretend I was gonna take a photo of you. And I go, you got 25 minutes to pump up. Well, what would you do? He'd be hitting lateral raises,
Yeah.
rear delt raises, curls, maybe some push-ups, maybe some rows. You'd be doing some leg extensions, maybe some frog pumps or abduction work to pump up the glutes. It's like you wouldn't be doing like, heavy deadlifts to failure, like
Hmm.
or like low rep deadlifts. And you can pump up like that. The next day you aren't crushed, maybe you did some hamstring curls, like assuming you've done lying leg curls regularly, you don't get so beat up from them.
Yeah.
And so that makes it more manageable, and then the people can work out more frequently. So what I try and do is, while I depends on the person's split, their training preference, that you can get awesome results training glutes twice a week. In that case, you do more on those days. You do more and you focus, more on the big rock movements. You can also see decent results training glutes 6 days a week. The thing is, if you train glutes 6 days a week, you can't be crushing like 6 sets of squats or deadlifts, or you can't be doing 6 sets of lunges. The next day you'll be so sore, you'll slide backwards. So you stick to like more shorter length movements like hip thrusts, glute bridges, back extensions, reverse hypers, frog pumps, abduction work, band work, because band work doesn't even work you in a stretch. Think about it. When you do bands, in the stretch position, it's unloaded mostly. And then in the contracted shortened position, it's maximally loaded. So
Yeah.
they don't create the muscle damage. So, but I like in general three. And with that, I like either 3 different options, okay? You either have all 3 of your days are like well-rounded days where you have one squatting or single leg, like basically it looks like a squat pattern. It could be 1 or 2 legs. One bridging or thrusting exercise, one hinging like deadlifting movement, and then one abduction movement. And that's you do 4 exercises 3 times a week, okay? And they can change each day. That's one option. The second option is uh, you train 3 days a week. One is like a squat and quad, a squat lunge and glute day, like quad and glutes. One is like a hamstring and glutes where you do like deadlifts and back extensions and stuff like that. And then the other is like straight up glutes, like hip thrust, abduction. Okay. And then the third option of training 3 days a week is like 2 heavy and 1 band workout. And that's what I do with my glute squad. They train with me Mondays and Thursdays. They hit it hard as hell. I crush them in here. Then I tell them on Saturday, just do a 20-minute banded workout where it's like high reps, nothing to failure. You're not counting reps. You're just trying to get a nice, decent pump and get some good activation in there and call it a day.
Mm. I love it. I think that's perfect, man. It's cool hearing some of that stuff because I've taken a similar approach, even with like rotating compound lifts and stuff like that over the years as I've worked with more people. So it's always cool hearing people of your expertise have a similar approach, and it makes me feel good. Obviously, I do want to respect your time. We've been on here for quite a while, but I've been loving this conversation, man. This has been really cool for me. I know you have a book, you have a training system that you use and stuff like that. Do you want to shout out? I know mainly everybody here is probably going to know where to find you on Instagram, but your Instagram, your book, all that stuff, you can shout it out right now. That'd be great.
Yep, it's at Bret Contreras 1. someone else had Bret Contreras before me, and he's posted like twice. So anyway, I'm at Bret Contreras 1. You can type in the Glute Guy on Instagram, and I come up. But my training system is Booty Buy Bret. And then I have a book called Glute Lab. And then my equipment is BC Strength. And that's what I really tried to start moving towards. It's like I like coming out with good equipment for people. And I like testing it with a variety of people, you know? So that I take pride in the fact that, you know, my equipment works for the masses and it's hard to do. And also I feel like I don't mark up the equipment like other companies do. I look at some of this equipment, I'm like, why are they selling it for so much?
Oh
I'm
my
gonna make
God, I
my
know.
own. I'm gonna make my own, and I'm like, yeah, I can sell this for $25 and they're selling it for 50. You know, so I'm not greedy with these prices there. So yeah, but you can always just type in Glute Guy on Google and you'll find my stuff.
Oh yeah, I think you're the only one with that title, and I know exactly. We just outfitted this facility, so I know exactly what you mean. Some of the stuff is just absurd.
Yeah.
So, man, all right. Well, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna link all that in the show notes. I appreciate your time today, Bret.
Thank you, Cody. Much appreciated. Good questions.